Last week, I was reading the text from the Bible. I went to the, ophthalmologist, optometrist, whatever he was. I said, "What do you think's causing it?" He said, "Old age."
The tears on national television were only half the story. When millions watched the world's most powerful televangelist crash down in scandal, most focused on his tears, his confessions, and his sudden fall from grace. But standing directly in the crosshairs was the woman who built the empire right alongside him. For decades, people wondered what she truly saw behind closed doors. Now, the quiet moments, the private battles, and the brutal reality come into light. When the wife speaks out. Following Jimmy's passing in 2025, his wife Frances Swaggart addressed the ministry's faithful with a final, poignant reflection on the man behind the global spotlight. Her public words honored 7 decades of shared devotion, describing his death not as an ending, but as the moment he finally entered the presence of the Savior he spent a lifetime preaching about. She reaffirmed her steadfast commitment to the mission they built together, assuring followers that the work would continue uninterrupted under the family's care. Her statement stood as the quiet culmination of a lifetime spent in the public eye, a final, dignified tribute to a complex legacy of faith, resilience, and endurance. When she broke her silence following his death, it mirrored the exact playbook she used during every scandal they faced. Only back then, under the harsh glare of the global media, her sheer defiance hit with an even fiercer force. When the catastrophic allegations exploded across world news in February 1988, standard crisis public relations called for retreat. Media outlets camped outside the sprawling Baton Rouge campus. Network contracts evaporated overnight, and millions of devout followers felt utterly betrayed. Yet, right in the center of the hurricane stood Frances Swaggart. She did not slip out through a back exit, nor did she issue a sterile statement through a hired lawyer. Instead, she chose to walk directly onto the global stage alongside her husband, taking her place in front of the blinding studio lights and satellite cameras. To the millions of viewers tuning in, her composure was almost terrifyingly total. On that fateful Sunday when Jimmy wept openly at the podium, pleading for mercy from his congregation and his God, Frances sat in the front row. Her head was held high, her gaze fixed forward, projecting a posture of unwavering defiance against the gathering storms. When she spoke publicly in the days and weeks that followed, her stance was clear. She was not a passive victim swept up in someone else's storm, but an active, equal partner in a ministry she had helped build from the ground up since their youth in Louisiana. In television interviews, special broadcasts, and media appearances, Frances forcefully reframed the entire narrative. Where secular journalists saw a hypocrisy scandal that ruined an empire, Frances framed it strictly as a spiritual war. She repeatedly insisted that no human judgment could outweigh divine grace. To her, the crushing public humiliation was not a sign of total defeat, but rather a violent trial by fire intended to test their personal faith. She openly defended her choice to stay, directly addressing critics who urged her to walk away from a ruined reputation. She argued that marriage under God was an eternal covenant, not a temporary business contract to be canceled when circumstances turned dark and hostile. As the months stretched into years and the immediate shock waves settled, Frances transformed her defensive stance into an operational strategy. She stepped up as the undeniable backbone of Jimmy Swaggart Ministries. Rather than staying quietly in the background, she took control of public outreach and anchored her own daily broadcast, Frances and Friends, on the Sun Life Broadcasting Network. On air, she fielded tough calls, spoke directly to loyal supporters, and addressed the operational struggles of keeping their independent network alive. Throughout her hundreds of on-air hours, her narrative about the scandal never cracked. Whenever callers raised doubts about the past or questioned the legitimacy of their continued mission, Frances maintained a bulletproof wall of faith. She spoke of repentance as a real, completed process. She framed her husband not as a fallen charlatan, but as a deeply flawed vessel who had gone through intense personal purification. Behind closed doors, those close to the organization noted that her public defiance matched her internal resolve. When executive staff members resigned and close ministry associates cut ties to protect their own careers, Frances doubled down on internal loyalty. She adopted what religious historians later described as a total siege mentality inside the Baton Rouge headquarters. It was a conviction that the entire outside world, the secular news media, rival televangelists, and governing denominational bodies had aligned to destroy their life's work. By publicly absorbing the shame alongside her husband and speaking out with fierce conviction, Frances did something critical. She gave the remaining core base of followers permission to stay. She demonstrated that if the wife who had been personally humiliated could offer unconditional forgiveness, then the congregation could offer the exact same grace. Her public voice became the human shield that protected the ministry's surviving core, keeping the light on when the rest of the world believed the doors were locked forever. But what was the exact storm that forced her into the eye of a global media frenzy? The first breach, the motel, the rival, and the sermon. One must first picture the sheer, dizzying height of the Jimmy Swaggart empire to grasp the true magnitude of the seismic shock that struck in February 1988. By the late 80s, Swaggart was not merely a popular preacher. He was the undisputed titan of global televangelism. His weekly television broadcasts reached over 105 nations across the globe. His gospel record sales soared into the millions. The Family Worship Center campus in Baton Rouge was a sprawling, multi-million-dollar modern sanctuary, complete with a massive Bible college, print shops, and a state-of-the-art satellite network. Money poured in at an estimated rate of $150 million every single year. Swaggart wielded immense spiritual authority, routinely calling out political leaders, secular musicians, and fellow ministers for their moral compromises and hidden flaws. That immense moral high ground, however, created fierce and relentless enemies. Chief among them was Marvin Gorman, a prominent New Orleans televangelist whose own large ministry had been utterly ruined after Swaggart exposed Gorman's extramarital affair in 1986. Driven by a bitter desire for vindication, Gorman spent months tracking Swaggart's personal movements. On a chilly afternoon in mid-February 1988, the trap finally snapped shut. Gorman, accompanied by a hired private investigator and close family members, cornered Swaggart outside the rundown Travelodge Motel on Airline Highway in New Orleans. Photographs were snapped of Swaggart in the company of Deborah Murphy, a local worker. Gorman brought the photos directly to executive leaders within the Assemblies of God denomination, giving Swaggart a stark choice: step down voluntarily or watch the pictures hit national television news. The story exploded across world media like an atomic blast. The stark contrast between the wealthy preacher and the grim reality of a seedy motel room transfixed the global public. Nightly newscasts, national news magazines, and tabloid talk shows analyzed every single detail of the encounter, turning the private downfall into an unprecedented public spectacle. On Sunday, February 21, 1988, Swaggart stood before a packed congregation and millions of TV viewers to address the scandal. What followed became one of the most famous broadcasts in media history. With sweat breaking on his brow and tears streaming down his face, Swaggart delivered his infamous "I have sinned" confession. He wept openly, pleading directly to his congregation, his family, and his global audience. He cried out toward heaven, repeatedly uttering the phrase, "I have sinned against you, my Lord." The display was raw, intense, and deeply theatrical. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as though pure emotional vulnerability might actually save his television empire from total collapse. The official religious response, however, was swift and unyielding. While his local Baton Rouge congregation gave him a supportive standing ovation, the Assemblies of God national leadership imposed severe disciplinary sanctions, ordering Swaggart to step away from all pulpit preaching for 2 full years. Swaggart, convinced his independent global network would completely die without his presence, refused to submit to the full punishment. Within months, the denomination officially defrocked him, revoking his credentials. The economic fallout was devastating. National television networks canceled his daily broadcasts immediately. Foreign stations dropped the program. Faithful donors fled by the thousands, causing monthly ministry revenues to plunge by over 70%, almost overnight. Student enrollment at his Bible college plummeted. Buildings on campus were sold off or mothballed to keep electricity running. Staff cuts eliminated hundreds of workers in a matter of weeks, leaving the once bustling international headquarters looking like a ghost town. The sprawling ministry that had taken 4 decades to build was suddenly hemorrhaging cash, fighting for basic survival, and stripped of its divine aura. If the first fall shook the foundations of the cathedral, the second wave shattered any remaining hope of a quick resurrection. The second storm, Indio, the shift, and public reckoning. If the dramatic 1988 tear-filled confession gave loyal supporters a tiny sliver of hope for long-term redemption, October 11, 1991, shattered that illusion completely. While driving down a desert highway in Indio, California, Swaggart was pulled over by local police officers for driving on the wrong side of the road in an unregistered vehicle. Sitting in the passenger seat of his car was Rosemary Garcia, a known local worker. According to police accounts and subsequent statements from Garcia herself, Swaggart became visibly nervous when the patrol car flashed its lights, frantically trying to hide adult magazines under his seat as he pulled over. Garcia bluntly told reporters outside the police station that Swaggart had approached her on the street specifically looking for sex. The incident instantly destroyed any fragile defense his remaining supporters had maintained over the previous 3 years. The public reaction to this second incident was fundamentally different from the first. In 1988, there was dramatic shock, heartbreak, and intense curiosity surrounding the fallen preacher. By 1991, that curiosity had curdled into outright mockery, disgust, and cultural fatigue. Late-night television hosts, national news satirists, and secular media pundits treated the situation not as a tragic fallen figure, but as an unforgivable cultural joke. Inside religious circles, the reaction was equally harsh. Former supporters, ex-worker advocacy groups, and fellow evangelical leaders publicly condemned his behavior as systemic hypocritical exploitation. Critics pointed out the immense cruelty of a man who routinely condemned ordinary people to eternal damnation from his pulpit, while repeatedly engaging in the exact behaviors he publicly denounced. The biggest shockwave, however, came from Swaggart's own response to this second exposure. Gone were the dramatic tears, the public weeping, and the desperate pleas for forgiveness that defined his 1988 breakdown. Instead, when Swaggart returned to the pulpit at the Family Worship Center in Baton Rouge shortly after the California arrest, his tone was surprisingly sharp, cold, and combative. Addressing his congregation directly, he abandoned any pretense of dramatic public accountability. He famously declared that the entire situation was strictly between himself, his immediate family, and God, forcefully adding that his personal conduct was flat none of your business to the general public. He flatly refused to step down for any extended period of rehabilitation or counseling, rejecting external spiritual oversight entirely. With the spotlight turned dark and the cameras fading, how does a man rebuild when the world has already written his final chapter? Rise, Fall, and the Private Life of Jimmy Swaggart. Long before the multi-million-dollar satellite dishes and global television crews, Swaggart was just a poor kid growing up in the dusty dirt road town of Faraday, Louisiana. He was raised in a fierce, emotionally charged Pentecostal environment alongside his first cousins, Jerry Lee Lewis and Mickey Gilley. All three boys shared the exact same explosive musical talent, pounding out fiery piano rhythms that could whip a room into an absolute frenzy. While Jerry Lee took that wild energy to rock and roll, and Mickey Gilley took it to country music, Jimmy took it straight to the pulpit. In the 50s, Jimmy married Frances, and the young couple lived in near-total poverty. They traveled the back roads of the American South in a beaten-up car, preaching out of pitched tents and church basements for $30 a week. But Swaggart had a natural, magnetic charisma. When he sat at a piano, sweat pouring down his face, singing Southern gospel hymns with raw passion before launching into thunderous preaching, crowds were utterly spellbound. He launched the Sun Life Broadcasting Network, a 24-hour global satellite system that bypassed mainstream network gatekeepers entirely. Instead of trying to win back the general public, he doubled down on his core message, preaching a strict, traditional doctrine known as the message of the cross. In his later years, well into his 80s, Swaggart continued to sit in front of the television cameras at the Family Worship Center in Baton Rouge, playing the piano and preaching to a global audience that watched through satellite and streaming feeds. Decades after the noise died down, what remains standing in Baton Rouge today? The ministry today. When Jimmy Swaggart passed away at age 90 on July 1, 2025, headlines across the globe re-examined the staggering trajectory of his life. A story of unprecedented televangelist power, catastrophic public scandal, and a stubborn refusal to ever abandon his pulpit. While secular obituaries focused heavily on the infamous hotel rooms and tear-soaked confessions of the late 80s and early 90s, the physical reality inside Baton Rouge told a much different story. The pulpit itself has officially passed to the next generations. His son, Donnie Swaggart, serves as co-pastor and primary evangelist, carrying forward his father's fiery, uncompromising preaching style. Alongside him, Jimmy's grandson, Gabriel Swaggart, leads youth outreach and associate pastoring duties, anchoring the ministry's presence for younger generations. Meanwhile, World Evangelism Bible College continues to train students for ministry roles, keeping the operational machinery humming. And through it all, Frances Swaggart remains a central pillar of the organization. Her presence serves as a living bridge between the ministry's golden era in the 80s and its modern iteration. Through her broadcasts, leadership role, and steadfast presence, she helped ensure the family never lost control of the institution they spent 70 years building. Carrying the torch. The leadership from the pulpit has seamlessly transitioned into the hands of his son, Donnie Swaggart. Serving as pastor and co-pastor, Donnie carries forward the signature fiery, passionate preaching style that defined his father's early revival meetings. Standing alongside him is his own son, Gabriel Swaggart, who leads youth outreach programs, drives digital engagement, and serves as an associate pastor to ensure the ministry reaches a younger demographic. Together, the multi-generational family oversees every arm of the operation, from the Family Worship Center Sanctuary to the Sun Life Broadcasting Network and World Evangelism Bible College. They continue to record music, publish literature, and stream weekly church services to millions of viewers across the globe. Decades after the world wrote off their story, the Swaggart family remains united, running their independent media engine strictly on their own terms. If you enjoyed the video, hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our next upload.